We have some positive results coming out of new clinical trials. This is in Newsweek. Magic mushroom treatment for depression, one step closer after psilocybin passes safety test. So this is interesting. This was the largest controlled study of psilocybin, and it was done at King's College in London. It included 89 volunteers who were about age 35. And what they found is it causes no serious problems, including to all these participants' cognition and their emotional functions. And the only things that happened when they took the mushrooms, and it was a 6-hour period, they were there with like a therapist or, somebody akin to that, some sort of counselor. They took the mushrooms, they were there for 6 hours, and of course, naturally, the side effects were of the mushrooms: hallucinations, changes in mood, feelings of euphoria, tiredness, and shifts in how they perceive time. That's an interesting one. And I've heard people who've taken these kind of psychedelics describe things that make no sense, but they would make sense, I guess, if you took it. Like, for example, they say you could smell sound, or you could hear smells, like weird wires crossing in your senses. And that's one of the effects of these, kinds of substances. But again, hallucinations, changes to mood, feelings of euphoria, tiredness, shifts in how they perceive time. But they said really no negative effects. I mean, I guess technically if you had a bad trip, could have been the case, but I guess of these 89 volunteers, nobody really had a bad trip. And they said no withdrawal symptoms either. So it's not addictive in that sense. Now, that's another thing that people who take these substances have been telling us for a long time, is that they're actually not addictive. They're not like an upper drug or a downer drug, which you can get addicted to. But hallucinogenics or psychedelics are like, they change your consciousness in a really interesting way, and then you don't feel an urge to like keep going back and taking them. But there's been studies that are now saying that particularly when it comes to depression, anxiety, PTSD in some instances, they're experimenting, and a lot of these treatments are working, whether it's magic mushrooms, LSD, MDMA is another one, which is normally viewed as like a club drug, but in the right setting, in a clinical setting with the right dose, it could be very positive. Ayahuasca is another one. Even peyote and ibogaine. So peyote was the Native American drug of choice, if I remember correctly. And I like how I say, if I remember correctly, as if I was around back in the Native American heyday. I mean, from reading that, of course. So yeah, it's fascinating that now there's this this psychedelic renaissance where for a long time there was a lot of suppression of the idea that these drugs can have any benefit at all. But at face value, we all should have known that's absurd. Why? Guys, we use derivatives of cocaine for medical treatment. Like when you go to the dentist and they got to numb an area, that's a derivative of cocaine that numbs the area for you. Morphine is basically heroin. So if you get into a massive car crash and your leg is broken, you snapped your femur, and you go to the hospital, the first thing they do is give you morphine. Why? Because it dulls the pain. So there's always, if we could find a clinical use, and that makes perfect sense, that nobody even bats an eyelash today, for a drug like heroin, you're telling me there's no clinical use for psychedelic substances? Of course there are. Just so everybody knows. Because we've all been, the propaganda pushed in your head your whole life when you're a kid. I had the DARE classes, and they say, drugs equal bad. End of conversation. And it's like, well, no, there's a reason why throughout history people have used them. Because they work. That's why they use them. People wouldn't be attracted to them in the first place if they didn't work. It's like saying, well, caffeine is bad. Really? Well, then why do millions of Americans every morning have caffeine right away? Because it works. That's why they do it. So, of course it works. Now, is there such thing as abuse? Absolutely. Everybody knows there's such thing as abuse and addiction, and it should be treated as a medical issue, not as, a moral failing or whatever, a criminal issue. That's insane. But yeah, they do work, and they do have purposes. And just like morphine dulls pain, it's certainly possible, and a lot of these studies are showing that when it comes to PTSD, anxiety, depression, other deep psychological issues, psychedelic treatment might be the way to go. There's been massive positive results where people snap, even with addiction. Isn't that an interesting one? Even with addiction, if you're addicted to, say, cigarettes, or if you're an alcoholic, a lot of people report, and I don't know if there's been a study on this one in particular, but there is anecdotal evidence on this front, that Ibogaine, people have taken Ibogaine, and it just snaps that that addiction that you had. Imagine being a smoker for like over a decade, and then you have this one substance, and you wake up the next day, and you're like, I don't even want that. I don't even want a cigarette. All of this stuff should be looked into. Listen, the societal taboo that we've had over drugs is like this old school puritanistic, I was going to say valedictorian era, but that's not the word I'm looking for. Victorian era, there you go, nonsense. Like, that's what this is. It's puritanism on steroids. And as long as we know there are medical uses for a lot of these things, study it, look into it. Because all the other drugs you take are also drugs. And it's putting a substance into your body. If you can get positive results, it should be studied. And if they work, they should be implemented. They should be allowed. Particularly even guys for like treatment-resistant depression, which is a massive problem. And they say some of these, that's exactly what some of these psychedelic drugs are being looked into for, is for treatment-resistant depression. People who've tried every antidepressant pill under the sun and it doesn't work, and they've tried diet and exercise and everything you could possibly think of, and they're still depressed. Well, if you have other options that could possibly work, to have some, close-minded approach where you say, no, we're not even going to allow, ourselves to look into that. How stupid is that? And that's the way the law, unfortunately, works in the U.S. right now with many of these substances. We have the different schedules, Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3. And, if something's on the list of I think Schedule 1 is the worst, and it's like, why do you have a lot of the substances on that list that you have on that list? Marijuana is a Schedule 1 substance when it comes to the federal government. That's how they've categorized it. That's insane, especially since it's not that, but also because a lot of states have legalized it, and some states have legalized it for medicinal use. Some have recreational, some have medicinal. But it's like, it works. It works. Go talk to some veterans with PTSD. Some of them smoke, and it makes them feel better. So what are we doing here? What are we doing? We need to approach all this stuff in a much more open-minded way, because obviously we never made the decisions we originally made based off the science. That's the important point, guys. It was never like the original decisions to put this on Schedule 1 and this drug on Schedule 2. That was never because we looked at the science and people in white coats and glasses said like, yes, we're doing the right thing here. No. We got to that point through a series of terrible decisions that were influenced by special interest groups who didn't want a competition to their drugs that they were selling, whether it's pharmaceutical companies or alcohol companies or tobacco or whoever it might be. We got there based on bad science. In some cases, guys, literally based on racism. Literally based on racism. Where previous generations didn't want, oh my God, you have these Chinese immigrants who have these opium dens and the white girls are going in there and we don't want our precious white girls sleeping with the Chinese men, so ban the opium. You used to be able to go to the store and get opium. Literally. You get like a little bottle of, laudanum, however the fuck you say it. Like that was opium. You could just go get it at the store. And when it comes to marijuana, guess what? Mexican immigrants brought it in and we were like, oh my God, it must be bad. It makes them crazy. Arrest everybody who does it. It was a way of trying to criminalize that lifestyle because we had deemed that those people were criminal by nature. So it's not like these decisions were made at a time as, oh yes, we're all looking at the science of it. No, the laws didn't develop like that. So it's time to change them. And it's time to study them even more thoroughly than we are. And we will get to a point where many of them will be legal for medicinal use and others will be legal for recreational use. And that's definitely a good thing.